All right, A and P1 students, we're going to continue talking about the integumentary system. I'm going to go to our learning objectives. So remember where we're at right now. So we're going to talk about the variations in the epidermis. So we're kind of still talking about the epidermis. And so we're going to first talk about the thick skin and where it's located in the body, and then where our thin skin is located. And then we'll talk about what's kind of making one of, those areas that have thicker skin thick and the areas that have thinner skin thin. And we'll talk about the accessory structures, because not all of them are located in thick skin versus thin skin. So that's the one that we're on. So let's go to our picture here. They do have a picture in the textbook showing, this is showing the epidermis. So we have the deepest layer, stratum basal, down here. And then it goes all the way up, and this is our stratum corneum, so it's quite a few cells, layers in there. So that's the thick skin. And then over here, they're showing the thin skin. So they have the stratum basal layer here, and then the rest of the epidermis, and then stratum corneum on the surface there. And this is dermis down here. So that's showing the difference in thick and thin skin. So everybody's probably familiar with where you have thick skin. Most people are. So we have that on our palms of our hands and the soles of our feet. And we do have sweat glands in those areas as well. And that's probably pretty well known too. But we don't have any sebaceous glands, any of those glands that produce sebum, which is an oily secretion. And that would kind of make sense. We wouldn't want oil on our hands or our feet. That would make them slippery. And we don't also have hair follicles either, so in those areas where we have the thicker skin. So they lack the hair follicles too. Now, when it comes to the thin skin, it's pretty much everywhere else in the body. There's probably some variations, minor variations in certain places, but in general, the thin skin is located everywhere else besides the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. But you can find hair follicles in those areas, sweat glands, and the sebaceous glands in those areas. Okay, so now when it comes to the epidermal layers, so that's a big difference between thick skin and thin skin. The thick skin has all 5 epidermal layers. So both of them have stratum basal. And they all have the stratum spinosum, and then the stratum granulosum, and then the stratum lucidum. If you remember, that was the layer just deep to the stratum corneum. So the thick skin has all 5 of those. It does have the stratum lucidum, so that gives it 5 epidermal layers. So all 5 of them. When it comes to thin-skinned areas of the body, they don't have that stratum lucidum layer, so they're lacking that one layer of the epidermis. All right, so that's important to understand when it comes to our integumentary system, and we'll have some questions, and we'll kind of revisit some of that later on too when we go on to some other objectives too. So. All right, so our next objective we're going to discuss is the pigments that contribute to our skin color. So there are 3 of them that we're going to talk about. So hemoglobin, melanin, and keratin. So those are and I probably should try to pronounce that, because keratin was our protein in our cells that are keratinocytes in our epidermis. Keratin, maybe I'll say keratin. Keratin, that's actually a pigment that can be inside our keratinocytes. So I'll try to pronounce those. So they're definitely spelled differently, but sometimes when you pronounce them, I sometimes pronounce them the same way. So keratin and then keratin. So we'll say it that way. Okay, so let's look at our hemoglobin, and hopefully you're familiar with hemoglobin because we've talked about that as one of the examples of proteins that are in our body, and when we did the osmosis case study, we talked about how hemoglobin was the pigment in our red blood cells that the oxygen binds to, so our red blood cells can carry that oxygen. So when it comes to hemoglobin, because it's the pigment that's in our blood that gives the blood the color, that red color, then depending on whether we have a lot of blood flow going to our vessels that are in our skin, or whether we don't have a lot of blood flow, so the color of our skin can be changed based on the amount of blood that is allowed to go to our surface of our skin. So realize, everybody's familiar with this, if you go out and exercise, especially if it's hot out, you go out and run a mile or something, generally your face, you notice it probably most, you'll get very color change in your face, so it'll become more red colored, and that's because the body is causing more blood to flow to the surface of the skin, so that way we can get rid of some of that heat that was generated, and to maintain our normal body temperature. So our skin can change based on how much blood flow is going to our vessels that are in our skin, that are close to our skin surface. So it could be from exercise, it could be from embarrassment or excitement. There's other causes for our bodies to send more blood to our vessels that are in our skin. And then the opposite can happen too if we have a problem. Say we're anemic, which means that we don't have enough hemoglobin in our blood, then we don't have as much of that pigment. Maybe we don't have as much red blood cells. That could be another cause. If we don't have that much of the hemoglobin pigment in our bloodstream, then that'll make our skin look more pale, because we don't have as much of that pigment giving our skin that kind of pink color. So that could be a sign. If we look at our skin and it looks kind of pale, that could be an indicator that we're have some disorder going on. So sometimes the change in skin color based on hemoglobin is, kind of a normal response to things that we do, and then sometimes it might be a sign of a problem, like a disease or a disorder. So, but hemoglobin definitely contributes to our skin color. It has a contribution to it. So, and again, that can kind of change and then change back, under normal activities that we do. Okay, so that was hemoglobin. And then the other pigment that we want to know how it contributes to skin color is the melanin. And we kind of talked about melanin when we talked about the stratum basal layer of the epidermis, because that's where the melanocytes that produce the melanin are located. So now melanin, we didn't talk about this, but the melanin that's made in those, here I'll show you this picture because they have it here. The melanin, so they're kind of zooming in on the stratum basal. So these are our keratinocytes. There's 3 of them here. There's 3 of them here. They're in the stratum basal layer of our epidermis. And so then this is our melanocyte, and those little brown dots, they're little inclusions, cell inclusions that they're kind of all throughout there. That's the melanin, they call them granules. So that's, it's actually a protein that's in there. So it doesn't stay, the melanin doesn't stay inside the melanocytes. What it will do, it'll be transferred, and you can kind of see this one kind of transferring some of it from the melanocyte into a keratinocyte. So it will be released, and it's a pretty large molecule, so they usually release it by exocytosis, which we learned about in chapter 4 when we did the biology of the cell and how things can get across the plasma membrane. So it's getting released by exocytosis because it's a pretty large molecule. And so then that melanin, those melanin granules some will stay in the melanocyte, but a lot of them will go into the keratinocytes, either, in the stratum basal layer or the stratum spinosum layer. And then you'll notice that they crowd all around the nucleus. That's where they are going to go once they get into the keratinocytes, is just kind of form this little halo around our nucleus. And we'll talk about why that's important for protection later. All right. So this melanin that's present in our produced by our melanocytes and then present in our keratinocytes, remember it can be various colors depending on heredity and then also on sun exposure. So there's kind of 2 reasons that the melanin will how it will influence the skin color. So heredity kind of sets the stage for how much melanin is produced and what color it is, and that kind of is associated with different skin tones. And then if we get a lot of sun exposure, our melanocytes will produce more melanin, and then that will cause our darkening of our skin as well. So melanin plays a role in skin color as well. So probably the biggest role, I would say, is the melanin for skin color. Okay, so let me go back here. And something that I want to talk about, so the amount of melanin in the skin, again, heredity, so that just means like the genes that that person carries will determine what color of melanin they produce. And then light exposure, again, can influence skin color. So if they have a larger amount of exposure to ultraviolet light, then they're generally going to have more melanin, and it'll cause their skin to be darker. Okay, so something to realize that I always ask questions on the test about is that just realize that everybody, no matter what their skin color is, has the same number of melanocytes. So everybody has the same number of melanocytes. So everybody's born with the same number of melanocytes. So everybody's got melanocytes. The only difference in why we may all have different skin tones is because how much of that melanin those melanocytes produced, which again is influenced mainly by heredity and light exposure, and then what color they are, which again is influenced mainly by heredity. So that's what makes people have different skin tones primarily, is their melanocytes and how active they are. So if they produce a lot of melanin, they're really active. If they don't produce a lot of melanin, they're not so active. And then the color of that melanin. Remember, it could be brown, black, yellow, tan, so various colors. So that's kind of what determines our skin tone. But everybody has the same number of melanocytes. That's not different. It's just based on what those melanocytes do as far as how much melanin they produce and what color that melanin is. And again, that's primarily caused by or influenced by heredity and light exposure. So if you have darker colored skin, if you have a more darker colored skin, that just means your melanocytes produce more melanin, and probably that melanin's like a darker color. And then if you're a light-skinned person, you're probably not producing as much melanin, and that melanin might be a lighter color. So, all right, so that was our melanin as a influence of our skin color. And then the last one that can influence our skin color is called keratin. So keratin is a pigment, and we get it by eating yellow-orange vegetables. So whenever we eat yellow-orange vegetables, that keratin, that's in the yellow-orange vegetables, it will be stored in our keratinocytes. And also it can be stored in our hypodermis or subcutaneous layer too, where the adipose tissue, where the adipocytes are. So that's kind of a general reason why when you see adipose tissue represented in pictures, it's usually kind of a yellowy color. It's because they do have keratin that's present in there, so giving it more of a yellowish color. So keratin's important because its role in the body is it can be converted to vitamin A, which is one of those nutrients that our cells need to function properly. So for good vision and for other important body functionings, vitamin A is essential. So, but when keratin enters the body, it gets stored in keratinocytes and also in our in the subcutaneous areas, and that's what kind of gives it, how it contributes to the yellow skin color that we see. So, all right, and I'm running out of time for the last objective, so I'll start talking about it in the next video. So we'll talk about albinism and then move on with our other objectives over the integumentary system. So I'll see you in the next video.